podcast where we go beyond just strokes and strategy. Our mission here is to change the culture of tennis, having one conversation at a time through a more positive and holistic approach. And if you guys can do me a big favor, please like, share, and subscribe. That would be amazing. And today we have Jon on the pod. And Jon and I met actually at Broken Sound through Greg Wheaton there. I don't know if he's still the director there or not anymore, but if he is, he's been the director there forever. And I always love Broken Sound. That was a great starting point in my actual tennis career. And so many people I feel like go through there, and we got a hit, and just, yeah, it kind of started from there. And now we got to reconnect. Jon, you've been in the tennis world forever. You bring so many different things to the tennis world too, connecting so many people. But really for today, just sharing where tennis initially started for you.
Yeah. Well, great to reconnect, Gira. I do, before I start, I want to introduce my sidekicks, DJ, who comes with me everywhere. And I have
Aw,
my cat on the floor.
yeah,
So
love
I'm in good company. I need a support system, right? Tennis is about a support system.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I started, Gira, actually on the courts of Inverary in Fort Lauderdale, watching my mother just going around the courts. And it's interesting because I ask the same question sometimes with why people get into tennis versus team sports and other things. And I think it's just the independent nature, the accountability style of tennis, where it's all about you improving and taking those necessary steps, and just being very competitive. And so that's kind of how I started in watching my mother. And then all of a sudden I was competing in tournaments really young, right from probably 9, 10 years old.
Wow. Wow, really young. Yeah, absolutely. That's really cool. So from there, I mean, you've worked with some top players too through your journey. What was that like coming from a competitive standpoint, and then also being able to work with someone like Bethanie Mattek and sorry, Vince Spadea and some of those players who got, top players in the world. It's always fun to work with some of those top players.
Yeah, Vince, it's an interesting story because we have a big history. We started playing actually at probably competed our first tournament at 9, 10 years old.
Wow.
And I got on the court and Vince just like took me down big time. This guy was just like from another world. And then we proceeded to play up to 12 times, yes, with the final time at Patch Reef Park in a men's open prize money tournament. And
Okay.
yeah, and that was at 13 years old. So from that 9 to 13-year-old span, we played 12 times. We had a 5-6 record going into Patch Reef. I was up 2-0, playing really well, and he wins the next 12 games. And like 4 years later, he's playing Chang in the third round of the U.S. Open.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know I'm digressing from the question, which I'll get to, but part of my journey was figuring this out. How did this guy that I competed pretty evenly just take it to levels and beyond?
Yeah.
And Vince ended up winning every national title at 14 years old. And I learned, and that's why I wrote in my book, Acing It on the Journey to Your Best You. And I developed this service, tennisconsulting.net, because I realized that if you don't start the process young with all the habits, and you and I have talked about holistic habits, technical, physical, mental, emotional, strategic, and spiritual habits, if those things aren't connecting at a young age, and you're competing against super talented athletes with incredible eye-hand coordination. To give you an example, like Vince, we used to play every sport together, throw around a baseball, a basketball, and he was so super coordinated.
Mm.
He also had massive legs. He also had parents that were pushing him harder than ever. He also came from a background that wasn't very lucrative. Vince was also extremely passionate. It's interesting. I was a little bit more like Agassi's book, where I love tennis and there were certain things I loved and I didn't. But Vince's, escape, he used to tell me, was being on the tennis court. Whereas
Mm.
for me, hitting tennis balls, I didn't really like that. I liked the competing aspect,
Yeah.
and I had to kind of, as I've gotten older, I've liked it more because I had to kind of get more at peace with myself. Where hitting a tennis ball and feeling the ball, and it was funny. A coach of mine, when we were playing in 2021, he was asking questions to Vince and I, and he was like, what are you trying to feel on the tennis court? And Vince gave him a whole story. Like I couldn't even answer the question. It was like he was talking to Chinese. And that was just the pure simplicity of the game that I didn't really enjoy. And if you don't have that where you can literally feel the ball and you don't mind hitting hundreds of balls and just enjoying the simplicity of the process becomes hard. I know that doesn't answer your coaching question, but we'll get
No,
there.
that's fine. I love, this is all, we're just having a conversation, so it doesn't have to be perfectly in a line, but I think it's really cool, like your background with growing up with someone like that, being around it. And then you do wonder, like, you're kind of going along this same path, and then someone just makes this huge jump, and you're just like, what was so different? And trying to see that. And I think for players, and especially nowadays, we're always comparing. So it's really easy to get into the comparison game. In some ways, it can be good because it can help us improve. But in other ways, when it brings our self-esteem down, then that's where it can really take a toll. Overall, I love that story that you have with Vince. I think it's amazing. And I mean, you worked with him afterwards, right? Like as you got more into coaching and coaching professionals and high performance athletes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I want to get into that. I do want to talk about what you just mentioned, which was really important. What I call, in a sense, healthy jealousy, let's say. How do you feel comfortable with yourself when someone that you competed with, and I've seen this with other players, like someone like a Stefan Kozlov, who I've, kind of mentored in that sense, and where you see your competitors just becoming stars. And I think that aspect of the spiritual, which
Yeah.
you're such a big component of, is so important, where you find that peace within yourself, and then you learn the skills on and off the court or whatever it is that your profession is
Yeah.
to improve. So that's an incredibly important piece. And I would say, sickly determined to figure out what it took to get to the top, and why a guy like Vince, and diverting now into Bethany the same way, where and you and I have been around especially in South Florida, the mecca of tennis,
Yeah.
where you see these parents. Like, I grew up with Capriati. I was literally playing with Jennifer when I was 11 and she was 9, and we were playing mixed doubles. Jennifer was Stefano, her father, and the push from Stefano Capriati, or obviously in certain people that did the push wrongly. The push is important. Of course, you don't want to do it in a crazy way,
Yeah.
but you have to have that push. And I grew up with Pierce and Jay Berger and all these people. It was interesting. And another story, Mr. Washington, which I wrote in the book, I was hitting and training with Mashiska Washington, who was the brother of Malavi, who got to 11 in the world. And one of the things that Mr. Washington said, first of all, you would get on the court with Mashiska and Mr. Washington, and literally he said that people would come up with all kinds of injuries after, because no one wanted to hit 400 balls in a row, which they forced you to do. But he made a really powerful statement. He said, tennis is a family business. And
Yeah.
getting to Vince and getting to the coaching question with Bethany, I was her sparring partner. That was really my first position. I was actually helping her a lot mentally off the court and mentoring her.
Yeah.
She was about 15. I was just finishing playing, and Bethany was, coming up. And one of the things I tried to help Bethany with, which is interesting, um, because we talk about spirituality, and what is spirituality? To me, it's the values. So, Bethany at the time was one of the best juniors in the world. And I was like, Bethany, or she was like, should I get a BMW? Should I get a Mercedes? And I was like, but Bethany, it would probably be best to get the car relative to your ranking, right? You don't want to get the BMW, the Rolls Royce. And at that time, she was probably 400 in the world. And I was like, build that. And so with Bethany, I learned a lot being around her father, Tim. I learned a lot working with Swanee Jacobus, who was the main coach at the time. And I remember the father coming on the court during one of our practices and going really, really, I don't want to say nuts, but he did it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And he really made a point with Bethany that day, and it really stuck with me. And I became friends with Tim after, and he basically was really yelling at her serve, and just going, really pushing the gamut. And he basically said, Bethany, I wouldn't be talking to your brothers and sisters the way I'm talking to to you.
Yeah.
And the reason I am is because I know you can handle it. So it's that psychology and knowing how to spin things, which getting back to the coaching is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Percent. And I love how you bring in the spirituality. I feel like this is such a missing element in the tennis world. So many times we just focus on the technique and strategy. How am I going to beat this player? We need those things. Those things are important, but there's such a aspect to the game and the person as a whole and incorporating that spiritual side, whether a lot of the time when people think spirituality, they automatically go to like God or a religious context. And for me, that's important, but it's so much bigger than that. It's really understanding yourself and getting to know yourself in all aspects of the whole person. And that does include that emotional side, that spiritual side. And I know personally for me, some of my lowest moments, if I didn't have that connection to that spiritual side of me, I don't know if I would have been able to get through some of those tough times in my life where you feel like you hit rock bottom. And it really having that mold to the emotions and the spiritual, and understanding that our emotions are actually here to work for us. And it lets us know where we're at. It doesn't mean it is who we are. And that whole aspect, understanding that really shifted for me later on in life, where I wish I would have understand that so much more as a player than as a coach, you know? And I love that, you know, in your book, you emphasize the importance of that too. And I think we need more of that in tennis. So I love that you're talking about that and supporting players along that path too, John.
Thank you. Did you consider yourself a tight player, rigid? Like there's the different types of players that get to the top. Chris
Yeah.
Evert, Jim Courier, they were a little bit more, rigid and structured and intense. And then, of course, you have the Federers and the Alcarazes and Ash Bardys. They get to the top in the world. Where did you see your fit out of curiosity?
Gosh, I would say it definitely evolved, but I was definitely more on the structure and rigid side of things. And I think I would have been a much, much better player if I could have allowed more of the Alcarazes and the Rogers to kind of like flow and be more at ease. But up until, gosh, I want to say college really helped me with my nerves because,
Yeah.
in college, just playing all the time, and understanding how to move through my nerves. Because when I was in the juniors is just, yeah, you feel like it just completely consumes you. And I didn't know how to work through that until so much later on. Because to be honest, I wasn't a natural competitor. I had to learn how to compete. I love tennis. I love practicing. I did love tournaments overall, but there was a huge side. It wasn't really till I got into college where I really started to enjoy competing, even though, I was a top junior player in the nation. That yeah, it really evolved, and I feel like when I started to understand more about myself in that regard, it would have helped me. And, I love to, on top of, some of the consulting services that you offer, I want you to share people with what you do on that, because we need people like that in this sport to give people an outside perspective in their game. And it can really help, the whole team, because as players, we do need a whole team. With it being an individual sport, I feel like we need even more of a team and the right support around us. So if you could share some on that, John.
Yeah, and that's why I asked you that question because it's interesting because I was a little bit similar to you. It's like,
Yeah.
so imagine playing and competing against someone like for me, which was Vince, who was extremely loose. And
Yeah.
I'll just kind of give you a quick story. We were watching him at the Easter Bowl playing David Witt, who was probably the number one player in the country at the time, serving about 125 miles an hour in the 18s. And every time I see Vince, we talk about it literally. And there was a big crowd. He's playing the semis of the Easter Bowl.
Mhm.
And I'm watching and he turns to me and he rolls his eyes like this before the first serve, down match point against Witt, hits the most unbelievable return, comes back and wins 7-5 in the third. So I say that because players like you and me
Yeah.
are, and this is why it's so important in answering the consulting question as well.
Yeah.
If you don't have every tool at your arsenal and you're competing with people who are naturally more talented, who are being pushed by the outside in higher level ways.
Yeah.
You're stronger, fitter. You need every tool possible. So firstly, with Vince, just to kind of digress back to that coaching question, I was with him, and then I'm going to answer the consulting. I was with him. He had asked me to come, and this was actually during his world record losing streak. He had lost 21 matches in a row. And I was basically there more, I guess, more as a consultant, and that's how I termed this. And it was the first start of my making of what I call the PCT booklet, personal coaching tool. And my aim there with Vince at the time was to actually push him, because he was at that level competing against the top 50 players in the world. And now he's losing, having his own mental challenges. He became the rigid one. He
Mm,
became the one that needed more push. And he even admits in it now that it would have been best for him to, and this was my goal with him at the time. I said, Vince, let's get you a top coach in the world, spend the money, loosen up, relax. I know it's going to maybe feel it, like you're spending too much. It's going to make you uptight in the beginning. But I say that because that was the role. It was more of a mentoring role with Vince. I wanted to keep him as positive as possible, but actually push him to make those higher level decisions. Fortunately for him, in time, he overcame that losing streak and he got back to top 20 in the world. So that was really my experience with Vince. Now, the consulting program that you asked about, the reason I feel it's so important, I developed this platform where I realized there was not enough accountability in tennis. And this happens in sport and actually all aspects of life, right? So you have the player, you have the coach, and you have the parent. So for instance, for me as a coach coming out of the gates after playing, I was sickly determined to figure out what it took with Vince, but I didn't understand the skills at the highest level. I had to learn from so many good coaches. So a lot of times you go from player to coach, but you're not really learning. But because you were a great player, you say, okay, now I'm a coach. It really doesn't work that way.
agree.
Another story of that was talking to Guillermo Cañas a few years back, and about 10 years ago, and we were talking with Guillermo, and he was really, really humble. This guy was top 10 in the world, just beat Federer twice, and he started coaching a couple years later, and he said, look, I needed to learn from my coaches who were working in the development, working in the trenches. So in getting back to the consulting piece and that angle, a lot of players, yes, the playing experience is extremely important to understand that side, and to understand the mindset of a player, to understand how to back off, when to push, to understand what they're going through on and off the court. But then there's the piece of, the parents, and then there's the piece of other outside influences, and then the coaches. So if you're a coach, if you're, an overall family and student, and your coach is not really learning and growing, or the coach might be stuck. They're doing everything possible, but they got a parent that's stuck, or they have a kid that's soft and stubborn. So really with tennisconsulting.net, the goal is to really help the coach actually primarily. And of course, I'm helping all three, where I start out by offering questionnaires to the player, the parent, and the coach. And then we go right in there where I'm watching videos and talking to each side and creating, number one, as much positive energy as possible. So there's three main goals: team energy, where there's real communication. And
Yeah.
that's why what you're doing, Jira, is awesome, where you're getting people to speak and getting them out of my skin. And so team energy is really, really important. That's the first aspect. The second aspect is mental toughness and professionalism. So we have a whole 3-month course with that.
Wow.
And the third aspect is coaching support.
Okay.
So
Love
yeah,
that.
yeah, we're really that you can help problem solve an issue. Maybe the coach is doing everything right. It's interesting. Like a lot of the parents often, like Tim Maddock, when I was working with Bethany, he really knew a lot of the right answers, but because Bethany and Tim were both type A type of personalities, she couldn't really hear it from her father. She wanted the
Yeah.
father, even though he had the answers. So that's where
Well,
having that coaching support piece. So
yeah.
like for me, if I can help a coach by taking care of a lot of the details,
Yeah.
so now they don't have to deal with the details, empowering their student, and now helping them solve problems on and off the court even with the coaching side, it really helps them. So I do that either in a personalized way with the existing team, Or if they don't have a team, I can work with them either one-on-one or in a group setting.
Yeah, and I think you point out a really important thing that I would hear so many times from parents is they won't listen to me, right? Like their kid won't listen to me. And they would always come to me and be like, "Can you tell them this? Because they'll listen to you," right? And there's even a time where the kid also will just get tired of listening to the coach. Depending on the dynamic, how long they've been working, if it's a private coach or if they're in a group setting, and even more so if it's a private coach. At some point, the player is just, they kind of tune out. So I think what you're doing is phenomenal because of that dynamic where the outsider can relay those other messages and kind of find that missing puzzle, to the whole piece of it all. So I think that's such an important part that, especially on the competitive side of tennis, we need someone like you to fill in that missing piece to the puzzle.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I appreciate it. Like, I'll give you for instance, for example, I was talking with the student the other day, and is part of this program, and he's playing a 11:30 match in 2 hours away. So we're dissecting actually when to wake up for that match, as you
Yep.
and I know from our experiences, how to prepare with he's playing at 11:30, so he's got to actually eat a meal and a half almost typically. And then how long is your warm up? How long is the drive? You got to factor everything in. Oh, potential traffic and your meditation time and your rest time. And then we factor that he actually literally had to wake up at 6:40 for that
Mhm.
match. So
Yeah.
imagine you taking that experience and going into a tournament and just getting there at, you know, 9:30, not eating, not doing anything, and you're low on blood sugar and you go through the motions and you have a bad experience. And now you're weeks and weeks and behind because you haven't properly prepared for that. So
Mm.
again, trying to maximize yourself in every which way. Why not?
Absolutely.
Especially if we're competing against, players that are more talented than us that are being pushed harder. And that's why these type services are extremely important.
Yeah. And I mean, just going into the whole mental and emotional side of why we need people like you too, because it is an individual sport, we don't always have the right team support, whether too, I mean, maybe the parents are trying to do the right thing, or maybe they're not, depending on. But that emotional toll that it takes on a player, I think it's the unseen until it becomes rock bottom. And now, of course, there's a lot more emphasis on mental health which I think is great, but it's also understanding not just the psychology, but the emotional component that ties into it that, well, like you're saying, there's so many emotions that could just go along with that 2-hour drive, right? So it's like not only are you physically, you could feel lethargic from that 2-hour drive, but then the emotional component, depending on the player, sometimes some players are really good at distracting themselves before competing and or preparing your mind in the right way, or almost already playing the match before the match already starts. So that emotional side and being able to help regulate the player. And a lot of the time too, like you said, you're helping the coaches depending on the dynamic of the player and the player will feed off of the coach. And depending on how well emotionally controlled the coach is too, that player will feed off just like the player will feed off the parent. So that dynamic, there is so many parts to that. And I think it's even more emphasized in tennis because of it being an individual sport.
Yeah. And you look at like players, Yannick Sinner, these players are like beyond their age.
Yeah.
And so we have to get to that point within ourselves where we're as peaceful as possible because you're playing against people that are superiorly talented, that are beyond their age, that have had this skill training from such a young age. It becomes very hard to catch up. And like you were talking about, waiting till you hit rock bottom is a harder process to do. Sometimes it's the only choice, but at the end of the day, people have to make the decisions on a daily basis to do the right things, or else they're going to be way far behind. And it kind of reminds me of another story with Pat Etcheberry, where people would say, "Oh, I'm in the best shape of my life." They would come to Pat, Pat was the world class physical trainer of Sampras and Hennon and all these players. And Pat, they would go, "Oh, Pat, I'm in this, I'm in this." Just like people saying, "Oh, I'm going to be the best in the world. I'm the greatest." You hear a lot of talk in tennis.
Yeah.
And Pat was like, "I don't believe anything I hear, only half of what I see." It's the
True.
daily
Yeah.
actions that add up. Get back to like the Outliers book where you're doing 10,000 hours of quality time. And you can't, no matter how much you know and understand, even us as players, because we're not physically doing what we used to do,
Yeah.
we're not going to be able to be at that level. So if you're not doing everything technically, physically, mentally, emotionally, strategically, and spiritually on a consistent basis, you're not going to, I don't want to use my book title, ace it on the journey to your best you, but it kind of works hand in hand.
Yeah, I love it. No, that's great. Jon, where can people find your book and find your consulting services?
Yeah. So the book called Acing on the Journey to Your Best You, acing it with an exclamation mark on the journey to your best you, is on Amazon. People can reach out to me at info@tennisconsulting.net. The website is tennisconsulting.net.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad to help. I mean, what you're doing, Gira, is awesome. I also want to mention too, because it's an extension of what I believe in the accountability process is videotaping and cameras and everything else. Because
Yeah.
I recently was working, I'm a product ambassador for a company called Save My Play,
Yeah.
which is the easiest way possible, the most affordable system for watching yourself play a sport. And so therefore, when there's cameras there, people like myself as consultants or coaches or mental toughness coaches, whatever it is, can watch what's going on. Things are documented. So now all this hearsay and everything else. So that's really, really important.
Yeah.
There's great, systems out there for accountability that, we just might as well add on to
Well,
ourselves.
I love it because I mean, gosh, when we played, it was like you had the massive camera video recording, and maybe they had it at like one national tournament if you're lucky. So now having access to all, these cameras where you can take a look at your game, it's such a great tool for coaches to take a look at your game as well. Even more so if you're traveling nationally or internationally, the coach can't always be there. But if you have that camera and using that tool, I mean, I did see that some places you already have it installed, but I love this concept. I think it is the future of tennis. What you're doing with this program is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my friend David Fox founded the company, and it's at, for instance, the Battle of Boca, which does 52 tournaments a year, the USTA National Tennis Center, Orlando, in New York. But this is so important for coaches and what I do with tennisconsulting.net, because a coach now a player can take their cameras to the tournaments. And this is a structural problem that coaches have. And it's
Mhm.
not their fault. They can't really watch their students play. So
Yeah.
now if we utilize every tool at our disposal, like you and I were talking about, people can wear a vest and get stronger and fitter just by wearing a vest. And there's so many different types of tools. So having this portable camera system, and the Save My Play cameras are both permanent and portable, but a student goes to a tournament and takes the camera with them. Now they tape the match, which is as easy as possible with this camera system. And now they can send that link to the coach, and the coach can annotate over that video, literally
Yeah.
annotate over, write on it, draw, voiceover. So now that cohesion that's missing, and that kind of goes back to the tennisconsulting.net. When a, a when a coach doesn't really have the cohesion, maybe the parent is really difficult.
Yeah.
What I try to do is create outlook, a different, my background being in mediation, life coaching, and tennis coaching, and my own personal experiences as a player. So I try to make everyone on the team feel as comfortable as possible for the ultimate goal of the player and the coach and the parent. But
Yeah.
how do you do that? It's through communication.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah.
Communication is, I think, at the heart of it all. Absolutely, within
And of
a
course,
team.
higher level standards as well. Where
Yeah,
we place the standards on everyone.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, Jon, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. And for all the listeners out there, we're gonna have Jon come back on. He has so many things that he has his hands in. So definitely want to go into more of your grassroots and all the technology and programs and even more stuff. So you can be on the lookout for that. If you guys like these tennis tales, please like, share, and subscribe.